even as bad as things are now, and it doesn't matter where in society, you could take the worst, like Skid Row, like where you work. And if you take police officers off the street and this whole defunding movement, it'll get infinitely worse.
Well, yeah, every movement needs a villain. I think we all can agree that the most evil man in the 20th century was Adolf Hitler. No one can deny or dispute that. Me saying this is not giving this bastard a compliment. It's just being honest. He understood human nature like nobody's business. He understood if you want to galvanize people, you for any cause, right or wrong, you don't do it using love. You do it using hate. The one man who tried to do it using love, guess what happened to him? Dr. Martin Luther King. Someone shot him in the neck while he was standing on a balcony. But Hitler did it very simplistically. He played on people's emotions and frustrations of where they were. And what he said was, tell a lie, keep it simple, and repeat it over and over and over again until everybody believes it. One of his lackeys says, tell a crazy lie one time, nobody's going to believe you. But if you say it 1,000 times, everybody's going to believe you. Every movement needs a villain, and tag law enforcement is it.
Deon, welcome to All Things Crime.
Hey, how's it going, Jared? Good to hear from you.
It's going fantastic. I appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem. Glad to be here.
Yeah, for my listening and viewing audience, this is Deon Joseph. This guy has done it all. He's been in law enforcement for 25 years, public speaker, which I knew just based on watching some of your videos. And you've been working in the LA metro area for a long time, especially Skid Row. And he's written a book called Diary of a Skid Row Cop. So I first saw you on LinkedIn, I don't know, a year ago, something like that. And just kind of been stalking you ever since, man. Yeah, but just watching some of your videos, and one of the things that has impressed me the most about you is not only the fact that you're a law enforcement officer, and I appreciate your service, but also the fact that you can just turn the camera on and talk for 5 or 6 minutes about some subject that you're passionate about and just be able to go, man. And I'm like, this guy has to have some pretty amazing speaking training to be able to do this, because just absolutely amazing. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, the training comes from being a senior lead officer. That's my job, to talk to people. I was never really a great speaker in the past. But I don't like the cameras and stuff like that. But then when you're talking to the public, you kind of have to put your fears away, because if you don't tell the truth, someone else is going to tell it for you. And I don't want anybody telling our narrative anymore, or at least mine. And that's why I do public speaking. That's why I wrote 2 books. First one, Diary of a Skid Row Cop, and the second one, which is a 2-volume book about my life called Stepping Across the Line. This is volume 1. I had to let the world know not just what we do, but who we are, so we can stop the vilification of police officers and get back to the basis of getting criminals off the streets to make things better for the public. Not to do things to the public, but to do it for the public. And that's why I started speaking out, and I got better over time with it. That's all.
Well, there you go. Well, I'll tell you, what you do and the whole reason that I started this podcast or video cast, they are parallel, man. They are exactly alike, because I work for a company called M-Vac Systems. We do DNA collection, and it's a system, a machine that collects DNA where swabbing can't. And I'm sure you're highly familiar with crime scenes and stuff and how they process that.
Right.
Over the years that I've been doing this, and especially in the last, 4 or 5 years, especially, it just seems that the number of vilifications and the number of people that have taken, I just watched your video that you made, an hour or so ago. And I thought your point was spot on, where you were saying that, the scapegoating of police officers has to stop. And I don't know why they've picked police officers to be the villains in all of the bad policies and everything that's going on right now. But like you said, it has to stop, because frankly, that society does not realize how bad things are, even as bad as things are now. And it doesn't matter where in society, you could take the worst, like Skid Row, like where you work. And if you take police officers off the street and this whole defunding movement, it'll get infinitely worse.
Well, yeah, every movement needs a villain. I think we all can agree that the most evil man in the 20th century was Adolf Hitler. No one can deny or dispute that. Me saying this is not giving this bastard a compliment. It's just being honest. He understood human nature like nobody's business. He understood if you want to galvanize people, you don't, for any cause, right or wrong, you don't do it using love. You do it using hate. The one man who tried to do it using love, guess what happened to him? Dr. Martin Luther King. Someone shot him in the neck while he was standing on a balcony. But Hitler did it very simplistically. He played on people's emotions and frustrations of where they were. And what he said was tell a lie, keep it simple, and repeat it over and over and over again until everybody believes it. One of his lackeys says, tell a crazy lie one time, nobody's going to believe you. But if you say it 1,000 times, everybody's going to believe you. Every movement needs a villain, and tag law enforcement is it. Now, once again, I'm not sitting here saying that law enforcement officers are perfect. Every profession has a negative exception. But unfortunately, our detractors are masters at hyper focusing on or cherry picking incidents and making it the whole of what we are. And they say all cops are racist, all cops are racist. And when you say that, unfortunately, you end up tying the hands of the honorable rule of law enforcement, and you end up hurting the very people you say you want to help. And unfortunately, that's people of color or who are living in very marginalized communities. So they're using that tactic very well, and it's working. And from what I see, they're going to pull a genie out of a bottle that they won't be able to put back. And I remember the bad old days, and I can assure you they're coming back. And I want to be wrong. I'm one of those guys, so I want to be wrong. And I hope they get their way and things work out. And I'll be the first one to post a video. Deon Joseph's an idiot. I was wrong. I spoke too soon. But I've seen this episode before. We cannot allow this to continue.
Well, all you have to do, frankly, is look up at Minneapolis. And I think out of the entire country, they were the first ones to kind of actually defund the police and
Right.
start kind of the mass exodus out of whether it be layoffs or retirements. But
Right.
the police department, my understanding is the police department's at like 60-70% of what it should be. And
right.
Amazingly, crime spiked. Who could have possibly guessed that was going to happen? And
Oh.
and then all of a sudden, the very city council that was screaming and yelling about defunding the police and replacing them with social workers, de-escalation type people, all of a sudden they're allocating millions of dollars to beef up the police agency again.
Right. And it's unfortunate. And guess who called for the police to come back? Marginalized communities of color. They're listening to the loud, small voice, the voice that's dominating the microphone right now, because it's about career survival for a lot of them. This is where everything's going. This is where the money's going. And these people now have power to get me removed from seats. So instead of thinking about their constituents and their safety, they're thinking about being part of the whole woke culture, woke narrative, and being the acceptable narrative, and keeping their jobs. And unfortunately, people are dying as a result. And it's really heartbreaking. As I said in a video I posted earlier, I just had 2 homicides in 3 days where I work. If you would have seen the young lady who I saw catch a bullet for something she didn't deserve, and the look on her face, and the frustration of seeing video after video and talking to officers all across the country who are saying it's out of control and we can't fix it. And then to watch the same politicians, it's not just happening in Minneapolis, it's happening in lower forums all across the country, where they make policies to tie your hands, take away your resources, change the laws to give criminals the upper hand. And then when their policies clearly fail, they call chiefs of police, commanders, captains to the table and say, why aren't you doing anything about it? And I try to tell the general public, we're doing the best we can. They said they didn't want violent criminals out, where it seems like every violent criminal I arrest is getting out the next day. It's just really a disheartening situation for the entire country, especially for big cities across the country.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you guys are well, and that's why morale is so low. Most officers are not as vocal as you are, to be honest. And I wish they were, because there's nobody that can talk with the same passion and the same understanding as guys like you, because you're down in there. You're actually working with these people that are being, like you said, being affected the most by these policies. And to me, it's the saddest thing you can have is the already marginalized of society are the ones that are always going to receive the brunt end of the worst part of this, because criminals don't automatically go into the neighborhoods of some of the Congress people that are in
No,
Washington, D.C. They
no,
go straight back to where they were originally arrested.
right.
And all of a sudden, now that there's no repercussions,
Mhm.
they just have free reign of the area. And it actually, I think it actually emboldens them.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I for the last 15 years, it's been my goal to really try to educate the public. At my job, at the time, I had the freedom to really bring in college students. A lot of this stuff starts on the college campuses where they're being fed one narrative, and we had some really wonderful professors who wanted to give their students another side. That doesn't happen anymore, but years ago, I've taken out 3,500 college students and I spent about 2 hours with them. And in 2 hours, I completely erased 2 semesters of indoctrination. And through telling them the truth, one example is I'll show them a map of the area I work in. And in my area, there's like 5 different areas within my whole division. And I show them the top portion of my area where there's a few burglary for motor vehicles. I'll show them the west portion where there's some thefts. I'll show them the east portion where there's some car break-ins, and then this lower portion where there's a couple of GTAs. And then I'll show them the center where I work, Skid Row, where there's so many dots on the map where you can't even see the white of the map. And I asked those college students to come up one by one and say, okay, right here, this area accounts for 40 to sometimes 45% of all crime consistently throughout the year. Accounts for 50 to sometimes 60% of all the murders that occur in this whole 4.5 mile radius that we work. Okay, I'm going to ask you, where would you put those resources? And these are woke college students, right? And each one of them came up and pointed to the center of the map and said, we put all those resources right there. And then I would ask them the question, are you a racist? And of course, they would be offended. No, of course I'm not a racist. But about 85% of the people that live in that community are African American. Why are you down there with 50 officers and arresting so many Black people? Well, that's not why I put them there. And I say, stop. That's not why we put them there either. We
Right.
put them there because the data drives us there. When we're averaging 20 to 30 violent crimes a week in one particular area, it doesn't make sense to put all of our resources in Chinatown. See, there's this whole theory of equity. Well, if there's only 5 cops in Chinatown, there should only be 5 cops in Skid Row. But that is ridiculous. You put the resources where you're bleeding the most so you can stop the bloodshed. And these are the variables, these are the variants that don't get added into the equation of equity and policing. Once again, I'm not where I am. And cops aren't in the south side of Chicago or Baltimore or New Orleans or Houston because of the color of people's skin. We're there because if we're not, people die, and that is a fact. And that's not racism.
No, in fact, I almost think it's more racist to not put the resources where they belong, because then
Absolutely.
the people that are actually there are the ones that are suffering. To not help people that are suffering, especially if you're, I don't know. To me, it's this whole racism, reverse racism. It's part of the, what do you call the culture where the politicians are using the suffering of other people to
There's
further their agenda. And to me, it's the worst type of politicians, because it's like, you know what, do things for the entire community, but
right,
most importantly, focus on the area that needs the most help. And
right.
for your area, obviously, if you're able to take a map and look at it and just say, yep, that little center right there is where 85% of the crime happens, that's where 85% of the resources need to go.
Right. Part of one tool of racism, a very powerful tool of racism, is exploitation. And you hit the nail on the head. They take the image of someone being poor, being a person of color, and they put that image against a big buff police officer with a gun and a badge, and they send it out to the public. And that's all they see. How can this poor homeless person hurt somebody? And then you got this police officer policing somebody because they're homeless, which is an absolute falsehood. In my area, it's not a crime to be homeless. It's not a crime to be paranoid schizophrenic. It's not a crime to be bipolar. But when you're the boots on the ground and you've been there for 23, 24, 25 years, like I have, you recognize and understand that, no, I'm not here to criminalize someone because they're homeless, but I recognize that left unchecked, there's a criminal fallout within the homeless community that does a lot of damage. I always say this. I said, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, everyone needs to be held accountable. What happens when the super rich aren't held accountable? We have Enron, we have scandal, we have people losing their life savings and elderly who are now having a job at McDonald's. That's what happens when rich people go unchecked. What happens when the other extreme is left unchecked? We have Skid Row and it metastasizes. We have the south side of Chicago, Detroit, and it metastasizes. So we're using the wrong medicine for a disease, and we're seeing the effects of it. Where I work, we just hit 300. We're over 300 homicides, and we're just into. We had last year. We had over 300 homicides, and we hadn't seen numbers like that since the late 90s, early 2000s. And once again, that's because of this narrative that's missing some very important key points that would make sense to the average person, to the college student, to the new politician who thinks they're going to change the world through a very, very flawed ideology.
Well, again, you talked about Dr. King earlier, and how amazing were some of his policies, and he was just trying to get things out there. Say, you know what? Stop looking at the differences of what people have and look at their actions.
Right.
And
Right.
if we base everything on actions, say, I don't care what you say, I don't care what you look like, I don't care what you say you're going to do, I care what you do.
Absolutely. I mean, judge not by the color of someone's skin, but the content of their character. And what I'm seeing right now is even a lot of my fellow white officers, and these guys I've worked with for 20 years, they're really caring. They really want to do the good job, but they're being judged by the color of their skin, or me, I'm being judged by my uniform. Forget my character. And that's a really bad way to lead initiative. And once again, I'm not denying that there's a negative exception. Look, you're talking to a man who reported 2 acts of misconduct on my job, and I didn't bat an eye. Look, there is a negative exception, but when we focus on that, we cherry pick on those negative exceptions, and we paint the whole honorable rule, 700,000 men and women were brought, and use us as some kind of catalyst for a movement. Once again, we're already seeing the fallout of that, and it's already starting. And I just haven't seen one politician who was brave enough to say, I think we're getting this wrong. Let's pull back a little bit. And because everybody needs to be at the table, police officers, firefighters, mental health workers, especially for the things we deal with. Where I work, there's a high percentage of individuals struggling with mental illness. Now, once again, I told you, mental illness is not a crime. I'm not going to criminalize you because you're bipolar, paranoid, schizophrenic. But the variable our advocates and politicians leave out is that when their mental illness goes unchecked and they end up self-medicating on crack cocaine, methamphetamines, and spice and hard drugs like that, that's when their problems metastasize and they grow 100-fold. And that's when a bipolar person or paranoid schizophrenic becomes a police problem, when they're hurting themselves, or even worse, which happens often, they're hurting other people. They're hurting other people. And this is a reality that doesn't get talked about because they're a protected class. We can't say the truth about a protected class, but the laws need to change, and we're the front line. So now what's the saying now? Well, we need to send mental health workers. We've done that before. In 2014, I was a catalyst for an operation where they had police officers and mental health workers and DPS workers and elder abuse workers working side by side. Okay. First, they tried to keep the police out based on that false narrative that we were the bad guys. And guess what? The first day they went out, they were only able to get 2 people into the programs. That's ridiculous with all the resources they had. So the next day, me and 3 of my partners says, we're going to bombard this thing. We're going to be a part of it no matter what. And we joined those agencies and we were able to get 17 people off the streets. Why? Because we were the first responders. We know where the most vulnerable are. We know who's going to snap at any minute. The only thing tying our hands is the law. So they recognize that. And another truth is a lot of these mental health workers will not even approach these individuals when they're in such an agitated state of delirium. They're going to call us first anyway. So they're misleading the public about our capabilities and the capability of mental health workers. I 100% agree that the system needs to change and the mental health workers need to be more proactive. But there's also another reality there that when they reach someone struggling with mental illness reaches a certain state, like where I work in Skid Row, it's dangerous to send somebody out there with a guy swinging a bat in the middle of an intersection talking about he wants to kill everybody and he's on meth. That doesn't make sense. So these are the things that the general public doesn't understand, and the laws need to change as it relates to mental illness. And like I said, we could touch on that if you want to.
Wasn't it in Seattle where a social worker was killed?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And once and where I work, they call us all the time, and I get out there and I handle a mentally ill person better than the social worker because why? I've established a rapport with them. But there's even those times where there's a chemical buffer between us and the person in crisis, that narcotic buffer, and even the most best trained mental health clinician, best trained police officer can't get through. And sometimes you have to get them detained and in control before you can get them the services. And I want to talk about how we can change the system because as it stands now, there is no. This is going to metastasize. It's going to get better. It's going to get worse. Mm-hmm. So this is how we change the system. Currently, this is the tool law enforcement has, and that's a 72-hour hold or 14-day hold, depending on how severe their symptoms are. And that's wrong. And as also what people in the general public doesn't understand, it's not even 72 hours. You tell me you're going to kill yourself, you're going to kill somebody else, or you demonstrate that, or you're gravely disabled, we take you to the hospital and you're only there for 6 hours. They sprinkle pills on you in the name of civil liberties and kick you out of the street, right? But what's the problem there? The person is still addicted to drugs. So they go outside, they use more crack, and then the door revolves over and over again. So this needs to change. And this is where we need civil liberties groups and police and fire department and mental health experts who are great. I love our mental health experts to come to the table. And let's talk about expanding that to about 4 to 6 weeks. Here's why. Someone who's been picked up multiple times within a year, 4 to 6 weeks works. Why? Because you first, common sense, have to detox them. You have to get the drugs out of their system for them to even be able to hear you. Then what the public needs to understand is it takes anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks for them to even benefit from the therapeutic attributes of the medication, the good medication, to help stabilize them. Once you have that down, now the experts, who I think do a really good job of developing a report, develop that report and find out who their loved ones are. And let's streamline the process of conservatorship, right? So it doesn't take so long. One of the most heartbreaking stories I ever had was a family from Indiana who's been looking for their daughter who ran around Skid Row butt naked with peanut butter in her hair with her knife, and oftentimes we would pick her up and she even showed up to court with peanut butter in her hair. It was like, if that's not a clear sign of help, I don't know what is. So one day we did pick her up and I called the parents and said, hey, we have your daughter. They were in town. They rushed to get to the hospital. And guess what? They let her go in 6 hours. Now we had to start the process all over again of trying to find her. Who's failing those people? Is it the police that they're trying to blame it on, or is it the system? And we have to look at it that way. There's some systemic fixes that need to happen before we start releasing these individuals into the street.
Well, you guys that are there on the front lines honestly need to be telling these stories more often, because I think the narrative that's out there that's dominating the news, the social media, everything, again, is that the cops are the problem. And right. Anybody that walks in, they got a big badge and a big gun and an attitude, and that's the whole problem. And I say that with tongue in cheek, but right. I'm former military, and so I obviously experienced a small degree of what you're talking about. But being the scapegoat right now, that's where the focus is. And again, that's one of the reasons that I started this podcast, is to be able to interview guys like you, and especially the people that may not have as much of a platform as you do. I think you're taking advantage of, like, LinkedIn, especially. I don't know what other kind of platforms you're on, but just having this podcast, to me, helps expose the problem. And until we're actually all honest and upfront and willing to sit, like you said, sit down on the table and actually say, okay, here's the actual problem, and here's where the holes are of what you're talking about. You have this policy of, releasing people within 6 hours. And I personally think it all comes down to money. But what they do, and there's another interesting phenomenon that I've run into, is that there's lots of agencies that operate in a silo. And I think government as a whole has a tendency to do that. A corporation, because it has to run efficiently, can't operate in a silo. Everything has to be connected. But the government can do that. And so you have the police over here, you have law enforcement over here, you have the medical system over here, you have social sciences, or the social workers here, and politicians are over here kind of sprinkling their dust on everything and trying to make it all happen. Well,
Right.
the problem is it's when you operate in a silo like that and you're not a congruent and synergistic efforts,
Mm-hmm.
then what they do may affect you negatively and what you do may affect them negatively. And yet everybody has the same goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
how, you know, the
I want
the
to give you
problems, yeah, well,
sorry,
just to finish my thought really quick, the
sorry.
synergistic, or I'm sorry, the systemic problems that you're talking about, I think stem from that. And
Absolutely.
a big part of it is you guys are not allowed to have a place at the table in order to actually inform, especially the politicians who are making these policies.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they are completely uninformed on what is actually happening.
Right, right. You're gonna learn more from the boots on the ground than anybody who's just reading it from a 30,000 foot view or in a book. I always tell like even college students, I said, look, we all know that 2 + 2 = 4. But what you guys are forgetting is when you throw a variable in there, it completely changes the equation. And the boots on the ground, they know the variables. And what you were talking about with that synergy, working with other agencies, we demonstrated that from 2005 to 2010 with an initiative we engaged in to reduce crime and it rose 40%, reduce death 30%. And we literally had other city families, mental health, other homeless agencies literally working in tandem with us, tree trimming, street sweeping, whatever. We all worked together, and that actually reduced crime by 40%. It made it better. It created an environment where people could actually change. And here's the positive changes from that. Now that the people had a cleaner, safer environment from all of us working together in synergy, as you said, guess what happened? We had more people graduating from drug programs, more people choosing shelter over the streets, more people going back home to their loved ones. Because let you in a little secret, in my opinion, about 30 to 35% of the population of people in my area that live in streets are not homeless. They can go home at any time. They're just down there because they can party, they can do what they want, and mom and dad can't say anything about it. So you're absolutely right. When you remove any aspect of a city family from the table, especially those who are touching the issue like no one else, you are destined to fail. So we got to stop treating law enforcement agencies like the redheaded stepchild of city families, and because there are a lot of police officers who really care. And if you talk to the boots on the ground, you're going to learn so much. You're going to learn so much. Trust me, there's college professors who learned a lot when they did allow themselves to meet with me and hear the other side. Well, now that's virtually impossible. And that's why I really try to focus on talking to law enforcement agencies and getting them to better express or explain what they're trying to do for the community, not to the community.
Again, the wisdom that you're speaking about right now, to me, I think the majority of society's problems could be solved if they would just allow the people that are actually on the front lines. Our first responders have wisdom that anybody from the 30,000 foot view, including politicians and professors, and they just have no clue. There's one thing that I really want to touch on here, and that's of all the people that I've talked to, meaning all the police officers, detectives, especially guys that have been in the forces for 15, 20, 25 years, nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. And the number of guys that I've talked to where they're like, you know what, right now, well, in fact, I was just on, we had every Wednesday night, we have a clubhouse room. I don't know if you are on Clubhouse or not, but it's almost like an open panel. And one of the people that were on the panel was a homicide detective out of Indianapolis. And she was talking about where 10, 15 years ago, when you had open positions, you'd have 1,000 people applying for them.
Mm-hmm.
And now you might have 200 or 300. And so
Right.
the number of people and the difficulty in actually filling positions in order to have the force structure that you need in order to do effective policing is going way down. And obviously a lot of the villainization, that, if that's even a word, but a lot of the demonization that is happening with law enforcement in general is causing that early retirements and people just leaving the profession just leaving it for, it's like, it's such a hostile work environment. It's like,
Right.
holy cow, how can a mayor literally villainize his own police department, but it happens. And
It happens. It happens.
yeah,
And yeah.
but,
Well,
but
one of the
go
things you
ahead.
touched on was bad cops. You're right. Like I said, there's a negative exception in law enforcement, and any law enforcement officer who tries to tell you that we all walk on water and we can do no wrong, they're wrong. We know they exist because we're paying for their sins. And that frustrates me to no end. But what I try to get communities, whether they're college students or people in communities of color, is there's good and bad in everything. As long as there's human beings wearing a badge, somebody's going to disappoint us all. There's 700,000 police officers. Somebody's going to disappoint us. But I also say, why don't you have this same frustration with doctors and teachers and the military? And I'm not knocking doctors, teachers, or the military. I'm just pointing out examples where these are professions where they have the lives and the minds of people in their hands. Let me give you some stats. In 1 year, doctors in the medical profession, and I love doctors, I think they're fantastic, killed 250,000 individuals due to malpractice, accidents, and misdiagnosis. The majority of the people that died were people of color. No outrage. No one's asking to defund doctors. No one's asking to take away their protections. And if you take away a doctor's protection, he is not working. That's the truth. Teachers, I know I love teachers. I think it's an honorable profession. And I know most teachers are doing a fantastic job. It seems like every other week we see a video of or something on the news of a teacher having sex with their 16-year-old student, or another teacher having sex with 28 first graders. But no one's calling for the defunding of teachers. A lot of teachers are like, we don't get any funding. I said, okay, well, they should just cut you guys anyway. But you know, nobody's calling for that. Neither am I. Neither am I, because I know how hard it is to be a teacher and what a noble profession it is. Even the military. I love the military. I have family in the military. My father was a veteran. I have an honorable rule of our military who go out and do what they do to keep us America, to keep us free. But let's not pretend that there weren't great atrocities committed by the negative exception. And when I put it like that, it's the same thing with police officers. We go out, we're human beings. Our job is as unpredictable as humanity is, and we're human beings doing it. And there are people who have disappointed me to no end. And we're just as disgusted by a lot of the things. And I'm going to give you an example. What happened to George Floyd, and I got a lot of flack for this. And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, he died from fentanyl or whatever." Okay, whichever way you feel he passed away, there's no excuse for keeping your knee on a man's neck for 9 minutes, 3 of those minutes after he passed away. I can't justify that. I won't even try. So if I get blackballed by some, I don't care. What happened to Walter Scott was a crime. When I saw it, and when all my fellow officers saw it, we said, this is a crime. What happened to Laquan McDonald and Oscar Grant, those were crimes. But I'm sorry, we have to give some officers the benefit of the doubt in the form of Darren Wilson, I understand what happened to Mike Brown, based on the totality of the circumstances. I understand what happened to Alton Sterling. And so we can't just take every shooting and say they're all murders. We can't do that, because once again, our jobs are very difficult. And fear is real. A lot of people have the misconception that if you're a police officer, you can't have fear. That is a lie. Fear is what protects you out there. I'm going to give you one example, and I know I'm long-winded, but your boy, Officer Joseph, would have ended up in the newspaper about several years ago. I was leaving the station, and I was off duty, and I was going home. I was in my plain clothes, and I make a left onto Fifth Street. Fifth Street is completely black. All the street lights are out. And I was driving down the street, and the only light that was available was the moonlight. And as I get to the mid block of Fifth Street between Maple and Wall, I see a lot of people running, homeless people, gang members, old people, everybody just running eastbound while I'm traveling west. And I roll my windows down to see what the heck's going on. And they say, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. And I'm like, who's got a gun? I can't see, it's dark. As I get further down the street, I see a figure of what appears to be a young man running around with a gun in his hand, waving it. But I couldn't really tell what it was, but I see everybody running and screaming, totality of circumstances, right? As the young man gets closer, he sees an old man. The old man had to be 70 years old. The old man comes down the stairs to the sidewalk. The young man points something at the old man's head. And when I look, the light from the hotel, that looked like a freaking gun. That was a gun to me. Old man runs up the stairs like he's a track star. The kid chases him up the stairs. Next thing you know, you see the old man rolling down the stairs, getting up and running like Carl Lewis eastbound, screaming, "He's gonna kill me, he's got a gun." This kid, young African-American male, chases the old man and puts this gun to his head. And I stop my car and I get out and I'm pulling out my off-duty weapon and I was going to shoot this kid. Not because he was black, not because he was young, not because he was homeless, because I saw him pointing a gun at an old man. Said the only thing that saved that kid's life that day was because I wasn't used to pulling my off-duty weapon out and I hit the frame of my car. So when I pointed my gun at him, the kid runs to the back of my station. And at the back of my station, there's a light that shines. And I see this kid throw the gun into the planter. I get out of the car and some officers came and backed me up. We prone him out. And I reach into the planter and I pull out black duct tape that was perfectly shaped in the form of a gun. Wow. What, now, in my opinion, I would have been justified in shooting. But with today's kangaroo court for cops, they would have said, this is what the papers would have said. Skid Row cop who claimed to love the homeless shoots unarmed 19-year-old black boy who wanted to be the president of the United States. And then somewhere in the fine print, you'll find black tape shaped like a gun. That's what we're dealing with today. People need to, before you riot, before you destroy, before you villainize or engage in demagoguery against police officers, with every incident, they stand on their own. Wait for the facts to come out. And you'll find that in some of these instances, officers agree with you. Just people don't give us a chance to speak about it. Because once again, they want one narrative. We're all evil. Like I said, all cops are racist. All cops are racist. And once again, it's doing more damage than good. There are more good cops than bad. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. I wouldn't do this profession if it wasn't true.
100%. I absolutely agree with you. And frankly, as a man that, you know, my entire job is to support you guys. Obviously, I want to sell my equipment and run a business and make a profit. But if again, my entire life is supporting law enforcement and helping you guys solve cases. And if you were honestly as evil as the press and some politicians depict you guys, there's no way I'd be able to do. I'd find something else to do. Right. And right. The interesting thing about how you guys actually identify the bad cops is, I think, the major factor that is often ignored, because even when there's a bad cop, it's usually some kind of a major incident when he actually, you know, becomes and reveals himself. And right. To me, that's the problem is, as a law enforcement officer, that's usually a major incident, and sometimes people get hurt. And, you know, like in the case of George Floyd, it not only did a man die, but it was all caught on camera. And that incident alone, I understand the frustration and the rioting, and I understand it. I don't agree with it, but somehow that kind of, I don't know, that violent reaction to anything that goes wrong with policing. Because like you said, you can have a perfect society, you can have a perfect organization, and the minute you put anybody in it, any human in it, it becomes imperfect.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Just like you said with the whole George Floyd thing in back, I find out about most bad cops on the 6 o'clock news, just like you guys. I find out by waking up in the morning on Facebook and seeing some video. 25 years of doing policing in a department with about 9,000 to 10,000 people, working directly with about 1,200 people over 25 years. I only witnessed 2 acts of misconduct, like 2 real obvious, you can't look away acts of misconduct. And unfortunately, that doesn't get the ratings. Me housing 150 homeless people doesn't get ratings. One of my partners helping families in a project in my area get Social Security, or another partner of mine helping vets. And forget about the touchy-feely stuff. Just the officer stopping that drug dealer from bringing drugs into your community, or stopping that drunk driver. Those things without killing him, which happens the majority of the time, that doesn't get the press. Unfortunately, what gets the press is the sensational stories, and people people gravitate more towards the sexy, the sensational than the truth. And it's not only hurting them, it's hurting us, it's hurting them. It's just having a disastrous effect. You know, a lot of people, the number one question I get asked a lot on Facebook, why don't you go after the bad cops? I ask you, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a plumber. You know, do you know plumbers who've misquoted people on purpose and robbed them of their money? Yeah. How come you didn't get rid of them? Well, I'm not there. Neither am I. I don't work in Minneapolis. And once again, I
Right.
agree with you. I'm in tune with you. What I saw in Minneapolis was horrific and wrong. And no, I can't find the strongest of terms to use against what I saw with some of these cases. I'm with you, but you can't put us all in the same basket. You can't. And once again, we also have to respect due process, of law. When officers do get involved in some of these things, there's a process, and we just have to trust the process to a degree. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and exactly that. The people investigating it,
Mhm.
they are professional enough that even if it's one of their colleagues, they're going to do it right. They're going to, because they have to. It's
Right.
their reputation is now on the line,
Yeah.
and
And
for them,
yeah, and
for
it's
them
not to
to,
say that
yeah.
there hasn't been,
Well, sure,
bad
there
cover-ups and
always
things.
is, and that's we've been talking about that. This whole conversation is that there's always going to be bad cops,
Yeah.
and eventually they will expose themselves because they have to, just like every other profession. Eventually, like you were talking about doctors earlier, and prior to doing what I'm doing now, I was a pharmaceutical rep, and so I called on all these doctors, and a lot of them practiced for years, years and years, and then eventually something really screwed up happened, and they
Mhm.
exposed themselves for what they actually were.
Mhm.
Now, how often does that happen? It's rare. But
Yeah.
when it happens, especially if they're performing surgery or something and they're unqualified or they made a major mistake, or sometimes it's just that was the last surgery of the day. They've been performing surgeries for 12, 15 hours. They've been on their feet and they're just
Mhm.
exhausted, but they have another
Mhm.
surgery that's been scheduled and they have to do it. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's sometimes when accidents happen and all of a sudden, yeah, this guy's got a lawsuit on his hands because he screwed
Yeah.
up. Well, sometimes
And it,
that's the way law enforcement happens too. And some guys, they're good cops, but they actually had a really bad day and
yep.
something snapped. And who knows? But you guys have seen that. I mean, obviously you've seen that a lot more than I have, but
Right.
it's just one of
Right. Right.
those where as an outsider, I'm sitting back here watching a lot. I don't know how many thousands of police officers I've met around the world, but every single one of them that I've met has been a decent person,
Right.
and not just a cop. I haven't actually seen them be a cop, but from what I've met from them, they're good people. They have families, they have desires and things that they want to do in life, just like everybody else does, and they've decided as a career that they're going to be in law enforcement. And
Right.
to be vilified automatically just for putting on a badge, to me, is the worst of the worst.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And just like I was saying, like look at the numbers, compare the numbers. Like you were just talking about doctors, and some of them is not accidents, some of them is just done maliciously. Like there are some dentists who diddle their patients while they're sleeping under anesthesia. Of course, most dentists don't do it, but look at it: 250,000 deaths from the medical field from malpractice, accidents, and misdiagnosis. 1,000 deaths out of 700,000 police officers policing 320 million people, and we're the ones you're coming after. We're it. But I get it. A lot of it is media driven. A lot of it is agenda driven, and every movement needs a villain, and we're it. And I'm hoping that this dissipates at some point, but I don't think it will. I think we're going to see a few bad years coming, like I've never seen before. And once again, I agree. The people that are going to pay are the citizens we serve. It's not going to get better.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the pendulum has swung far enough that the policies are catching up, and the people that are going to suffer until the suffering gets so bad that the politicians start pulling that pendulum the other way, it's
Right.
going to get ugly. And it really bothers me that most of the people setting these policies aren't affected by the policies.
No, they're not. Not at all. Not at all. I've literally seen politicians literally right in front of us, right in front of a mob of a crowd, throw us completely under the bus and not one during the riots. We had 7 months of riots, and not one politician came forward and said, "Hey, that wasn't our cops. We don't work. They don't work in Minnesota. There's no videos of our officers putting a knee in somebody's neck. What about the officer that beat the other guy on the east side? Well, that guy got arrested. Our department investigated that. We brought it to light, and we sent that officer through the process, and he was indicted. But that's not our cops. And I was really hoping one politician would say that, but instead, once again, it's about career survival, not keeping people safe anymore. And until that changes, because I usually expect the pendulum to swing. I mean, there's always been this never-ending battle between crime control and due process. And for 10 years, you'll have the crime control folks winning. And to me, if either side gets too much power, it's dangerous, whether it's crime control or due process. But sometimes it swings to due process, and then due process. Right now, what I'm seeing is due process completely having a stranglehold on it. The extreme forms of due process, because I agree with due process, having a stranglehold on it, and we will not be able to get this pendulum to swing back in time to fix it. And then when we do try to fix it, it'll be just futile. We will be completely impotent, because what you talked about. Officers are retiring, officers are quitting, and then you demonize or engage in demagoguery against officers so bad. Now you got nobody wants to even be a cop. I talk to activists all the time, and one of their number one complaints is, why don't you guys hire more blacks? I said, well, if you guys stop scaring them, they might join. Like, I'm an African-American, proud African-American. I love my people with all my heart. But I caught a lot of flack when I first decided to join the police department. And even before, like, I almost said no. But thankfully I joined. And I always tell my friends and family from the African-American community, there's no difference between you and me. The only difference between you and me is I saw the other side. That's it. I'm not defending anything. I'm not defending anyone or one side or the other. I just understand human nature and why some shootings happen. I understand why those things happen, because I've been in that position before or been close to it. And, I once again, I just don't have a big enough platform, like many officers, to really say that out loud in a public hearing, in a public setting. And but once again, by the time that window does open up again, and it will, I think it'll be too late. And we're going to regret it. As a society, we will.
Well, I think in many areas, especially like what you're talking about, they're already regretting it. And
Oh, yeah.
Clearly, if it's only been, I don't know what, a number of, I think George Floyd was killed a little over a year ago. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. And so
No, it was May. It was May 25th. May 25th. I think it was
2020.
2020. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been less than a year. And in that period of time, you've gone from, these massive amounts of rioting, defunding, and already this spike in the crime. And from the spike in the crime isn't just from defunding. It's also from this lack or the tying you guys' hands. And the policies that come down that basically say, yeah, it doesn't matter. You other than actually killing somebody, you might get arrested, but you'll be out on bail within a day. And then that whole spike has happened. And then we're already back to, oh crap, we need to allocate more resources for the police and hire more police in order to make our streets safe.
Yeah,
and that's happened in 8 months.
You're right. And prior to the George Floyd incident, the unfortunate incident, we were seeing a rise in crime based on changes in laws. There was a proposition called AB 109 that was put out there. We didn't even get to vote on it. And this is what happened. It basically put them on the backs of the probation departments across the state. A probation department that was already overwhelmed. They couldn't even keep track of the probationers they had. Now they had these parolees, and they gave them these little flimsy ankle bracelets, and then they cut them off, and next thing you know, they were running around the streets again. So we started to see an uptick then. Then they took away the supervision aspect of it and said, okay, you don't have to check in with me. You can check in at a kiosk. A kiosk can't tell if you have 4 kilos of cocaine in your pants. A kiosk can't tell if you just stabbed somebody on the way to the dang kiosk and you swipe your card. Oh, you checked in. That's how flimsy it became. Then comes 2014, where voters, and I don't blame voters, because if I wasn't a police officer and I saw the title, the Safe Neighborhoods and School Act, I'd probably vote for it. Here's why, because a lot of people don't read between the lines. They just say, hey, we like safe neighborhoods and schools. But if you read between the lines, you would see nothing about the proposition was about public safety. It was about finding an excuse to release thousands of criminals, which there's these groups out there that want that. They literally don't believe anybody should be in prison at all. And that's who's behind this. So they voted for it. And guess what we saw? A rise in property crime and a little bit of a rise in violent crime. But then comes this evil step cousin, Prop 57. I figured after voting for Prop 47 and see how it failed, okay, and it promised all these programs and stuff, and it didn't come through, that nobody would vote for Prop 57, which made certain violent crimes into non-violent crimes. And I'll ask you, if someone spiked one of your aunties, your cousins, your sister, your daughter, spiked their drink and took them home and sexually assaulted them, do you believe that's a violent crime?
Oh, absolutely.
Guess what? Under Prop 57, it's not a violent crime. If someone walks into a room with an AK-47 and shoots at everybody in the room, but doesn't hit one person, do you think that's a violent crime? Of course you do. Under the new law, it's still a felony, but it's considered nonviolent, which provides levers to, once again, boom, cut sentences, cut time, and let these individuals out for this whole agenda of we shouldn't have prisons shouldn't exist. And it's really disheartening what we're seeing right now. And then what we're seeing now, then after the George Floyd incident, it gave those folks a little more juice to really come after us and throw the blanket title of systemic racism onto everything that we do. And right now, the criminals have the upper hand. And, it's really heartbreaking to see. It's really heartbreaking to see.
Yeah, it is. Especially because the more they understand that there's no repercussions of doing anything they want, there's a reason that with the last stat that I saw, I think it was Minneapolis again. It's seen like a 700% increase in carjackings or something. I don't know. It's some phenomenon. Maybe it's not 700%, but it's some just phenomenal number of carjackings. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think a carjacking is going to ruin your whole day, well, it's going to, especially if somebody actually gets hurt. There's kids left in the back seat when the carjacking happens. There's all sorts of major issues that can happen to that. But if there's no repercussion, they stole the car, big deal.
The message you're sending to the criminal element is nothing's going to happen to you. And now when you have district attorneys being placed, a district attorney's job is to be an advocate for victims. Currently, in many parts of California, you have these new district attorneys who are literally, they might as well be public defenders in a suit. They care more about the criminal than the victim of the crime. Like, this is not an exaggeration. I wish I was exaggerating, but literally we have these district attorneys now who don't care about victims of crime. And I don't know what's happening. I don't know if they're being bought, or I don't know if they really believe in what they're selling, but it's an abomination what we're seeing. We need balance. Okay. The public defender's job is and I respect that job. If I was in trouble, I'd want a good defense attorney. That's their job. The district attorney's job is to protect and fight for the victims of crime. We don't have that anymore in Los Angeles County. They don't have that anymore in San Francisco and other places. And we're seeing state by state, city by city, these types of DAs being promoted, funded, and they're getting seats and they're getting in to our disbelief. We think there's no way people are going to vote for this person, and they end up doing it. But we can't rest on our laurels, and I encourage police officers to start speaking out. I encourage victims of crimes to start becoming more vocal, because what they really want is our silence. They want everybody to be bullied so bad that they're afraid to say anything. I can't do that. I have a beautiful wife. I don't want her to be harmed. I have 3 beautiful children. I want them to have safe, clean streets. As a father and as a man, I still believe that criminals should be held accountable. And for me, it's not about punishment per se. People think, oh, when you put people in jail, you're just trying to punish them for being human. No, it's about giving communities relief from the activities of individuals who refuse to change their behavior. That's what I think when I put a drug dealer away for 3 years. That's 3 years that drug dealer can't sell drugs near a drug program. When I put away a child rapist, that's 7, 8, 10 years that a child rapist can't touch another child. We need to get back to that. It's about protecting the community, not hurting people.
Yeah. Well, I've kept you for quite a while here, and it's been such a fascinating discussion here. And I really appreciate you coming on. And like I said, my entire purpose is to give guys like you a good platform where you can talk about what's really happening in there, down in the streets and down in you know, the basics of society is where you guys operate, and
Yeah,
it's not up in the the lofty halls of City Hall. So
right, right.
we got to tell the truth, or else it'll never be. We'll never be able to actually have good change and
Yeah,
change
yeah,
positive until we actually acknowledge what's actually happening.
yeah. I remember my dad telling me once that the truth is like a horrible sword that cuts you and leaves you open. And nobody wants to get cut and left open, but when you heal, you're stronger for it. Lies are delicious. Lies are band-aids over a gaping wound, and it just gets infected and becomes infested. And we have to get back to telling the truth. Take the politics out of police work, public safety. Get politics, whether it's left or right, because in my mind, the extremes of both extreme ideologies, extremes of conservatism, extremes of progressivism, are the reason why we are in the state we are in. So I just thank you so much for allowing me to be on your program today. If you guys want to follow me, I'm on Twitter at Officer Deon Joseph, OFCR Deon Joseph. Yeah, you can follow me on Facebook. Also, www.deonjoseph.org. That's my website. If you'd like me to come speak to your college campus or your law enforcement and just share about community policing, the realities of policing and homelessness, I want to continue to get the truth out there. And I look forward to sharing with anybody willing to listen.
That is fantastic, Deon. And I'll tell you, we actually started a hashtag. It's called Posipole,
Hmm.
and it's all about if, like you said, the 700,000 officers out there, they are all doing great things every single day. And
Right.
hashtag Posipole stands for positive police pictures. And my thought is, if everybody that's out there that's wearing a uniform would just take one picture of what they were doing that day, they stop at the side of the road and help somebody change a tire, or they help a homeless person get help, something like that. And I know most of you guys, well, 99.99% of all law enforcement, that's the last thing that's on their minds. But
Exactly. We don't like that. Yeah, but
no,
it's
and
needed right now.
being in the spotlight. But you're right. But in order to battle the narrative that is out there, that you guys are the problem, that the scapegoating, I think the only way to do it is for you guys to stand up and actually fight for yourselves, because Deon Joseph and Jared Bradley can't do it alone. We
No,
we
we
need
can't.
we need help, and there's a massive army of police officers out there. Just take a picture. You're getting some lady's cat out of the tree. Take a picture of it. With the smiling lady with the cat. I mean, that's a weird 1950s example, um, but the bottom line
Yeah.
is, if everybody put a hashtag Posipole on I don't know if you know who Cheryl McCollum is. She's out of Atlanta, just a phenomenal crime scene investigator. She
That
she
name
helped
sounds
me.
familiar.
She helped me come up with the idea, and to me, it's awesome. I mean, imagine if social media was being flooded with these pictures every day.
You know what? I'm going to agree with you, and here's why. The other side is doing so much hard work and showing the negative. So I think there is time for us to stand up for our profession, and I will participate in that. And I will talk to some of my fellow officers. Hope they can, and hope they decide to do that. And you're right. A lot of officers, we don't, including me, we don't do what we do for likes or pats on the back. But in this environment where there's a narrative that we're all monsters, we do have to be proactive and say, no, tell our story. This is who we are. So I have one picture I just got yesterday from a friend of mine. So I'll tell you what, Posipole, I'll hashtag that on Twitter and spell it again. POS what?
Posipol.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like
Okay.
a playoff of Interpol.
I
So
got you. Okay. You will see that
Posipol.
hashtag today. You will see that
Oh,
today,
that's
sir.
fantastic, man. Okay. And you know what? Any of your fellow officers, if they ever want to come on the program, I'd love to have them.
Outstanding. Okay. That's beautiful, man. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Okay. We'll see you on LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff.
All right. God bless. Be safe.